Damn you, Gamza, you son of a bitch! Commissar Gamza, if you didn't know, is a channel here on YouTube that makes highly entertaining videos which are frequently critical of Games Workshop and advocate for 3D printing. And he's now got a Patreon subscription service offering 3D models each month. The theme seems to be tanks, tanks, and more tanks, which I personally wasn't particularly interested in. However, when he showed off this model, it was an immediate sign up for me. Buttermilk Bob here is a recurring character on his channel, used kind of like a devil's advocate to push back on the arguments made and also to poke a little bit of fun at the people who raised those objections. Everyone knows a Buttermilk Bob. Anyway, this is too hilarious not to drop everything else I was doing and spend a few days on. So I'm off now to go print and paint up Buttermilk Bob here, and I think while I'm at it, I'll take this opportunity to review his subscription service, show you what you can expect if you also decide to sign up, and see if it's a good value proposition. Let's go! So in addition to the Buttermilk Bob this month, you're also going to get a couple of tanks and some bases that are like have city ruins on them and stuff. It's pretty par for the course Patreon stuff. Included with the Buttermilk Bob model, and I really appreciate this, is a STL file where everything's already put together and it's all in one piece, so you can really quickly preview it and see how all the bits go together. This is something that I wish more Patreon subscriptions would do, because it's really useful sometimes to be able to, particularly when you have a model that has like a lot of parts and it's very complex, to have something you can reference like that to see how they put together. So here I'm dragging all the parts into my slicer and immediately notice that a couple of the parts don't actually fit the way that they've been pre-supported. Now my printer is a very typical size. It's a 6-inch printer, Anycubic Photon S. And many printers that people have who are getting into 3D printing are going to have a printer that's about this size. So this is a little disappointing to see, given that these parts, as you can see, if I just orientate them in a different direction, they actually do fit just fine. So I think they should have been done this way. Another problem I've run into immediately here is that there's no inclusion of the parts without supports. All you get is the model fully assembled and the model cut up and pre-supported. Now that's not the end of the world. I'm going to show you a cool little trick here, how to very quickly and easily remove supports from a model so that you can add them yourself again. This comes in handy a lot if something's pre-supported. In this instance where it doesn't fit. It's also very handy when something comes pre-supported and the pre-supports are just really bad. Maybe they're too big and they leave lots of marks all over the model, or they're impossible to remove, or maybe they're too small and they keep failing. So this can be really handy for that. So what you want to do is open up Blender, which is a free program, by the way. You want to go up to File, Import, and then STL. Navigate to the pre-supported file, the STL file that you want to remove the supports from, and double click on it, and that's going to open it up in Blender. This might take a second. There we go, now it's loaded up. So what you want to do is come up here to this little box where it says Object Mode, click on that, and then a little drop down menu will pop up. Click on Edit Mode in there, and then that's going to bring you here. Now what you want to do is hover your cursor over the area that you want to select, so not the supports but the actual model, and then press the L key on your keyboard. This is going to select the entire shell of the model and ignore all the supports, as you can see here by the model being highlighted in orange now. Then you're going to press the P key and click on Selection. Now what this is going to do is it's going to separate out the model from the supports into a separate item, which you can see up on the top right of the screen in the Scene collection. Now going back up to the Edit Mode button, clicking on that and switching it back into Object Mode, I'm now going to come over to the Scene collection and delete the supports just by right clicking on it and clicking on Delete. Now I'm left with just the model. And then it's just a case of going up to File, Export, STL, saving it to wherever you'd like, and giving it an appropriate name, and that's it. So I'm just going to do that for the other part as well, and then we're going to jump into Chitubox and do some supports. I'll have a video soon on how to go about doing supports. It's very important in my opinion. This is something that needs to be handled well, particularly when you're selling STL files. you want to make sure that you're providing STL files that are pre-supported in a way such that they are, leaving no island unsupported, being easy to remove while also strong enough to ensure that they don't fail, as well as just being test printed. You want to make sure that you've actually run them off and, ensured that there's nothing that's failed, there's no cured resin left in the vat somewhere that could potentially be crushed and destroy someone's printer later on. It's really important to get pre-supported files right, especially when you're charging money for them. Because the way I see it, most people don't want to learn how to add supports. I think most people would prefer a drag and drop type printing experience. I know I do. I've had to go out of my way and learn how to do supports just as a result of there being a lot of poorly pre-supported files out there, and also just things I've made myself with like kit bashing and whatever that I then have to, obviously go and add supports to. So as a seller, pre-supported files are actually one of your biggest selling points. So it's very important that you get them done right, in my opinion. Alright, so with all the supports done, I then slice the files, chuck it on a USB and send it to the printer. Note to self, level my bed before doing the next print. Looks like I got away with it this time. It appears to have printed fine. We'll see, it might be a little bit warped, but I don't think that'll matter. So after printing, I give the models a dunk and a wash and a scrub in some methylated spirits. A lot cheaper than isopropyl alcohol, by the way. Okay, into the cure station, which is literally just a Tupperware box lined with foil. Put the UV light on top there and let it run for about a minute. Okay, so the two arms and the head for Buttermilk Bob, I printed Gamsa's files because they actually did fit on my print bed, and I figured no point pre-supporting those as well, right? Well, actually, after printing out Gamsa's pre-supported files, I had a lot of issue removing these supports because they are thick. These are some really chunky supports. They actually left a lot of scarring on the models, and they weren't to a standard that I was particularly happy with. They were going to require a lot of cleanup, so I then decided, stuff it, I'll just go and support all those files as well and run them off again. So what you can see here is a comparison between the pre-supported files that come from Gamsa, which are on the left, and the pre-supported files that I went and did myself. So hopefully you can see that there's a bit of damage to the models on the left. There's a lot of scarring where these big supports were left. There's supports I couldn't even get off. I'll need to go in there with pliers to get those out. There's also a lot of supports placed that I don't think even really need to be there. There's also, you can see these little tiny supports in the gaps, like the folds of the fat on the arm and stuff, and just changing the orientation, they don't even have to be there. And you can really see clearly here the difference on the butter knife. Look at all the supports placed on the blade edge on Gamsa's file, and then on mine, I actually didn't even have to place any. Now the trade-off was that on the elbow of mine, there is a bit of scarring just because that was the lowest point on the model, and therefore there were a lot of islands there just due to the texture on the model. So it is a little bit beaten up there, and it's going to require a little bit of cleanup. But compared to the other file, it's a lot less cleanup. It's a lot less work to do to get a good looking part. So Gamsa, buddy, I would like to see an improvement to your pre-supported files. If you need help with that, I'd be happy to do them for you. If you're watching this and you're open to it, get in touch. Alright, so here I'm starting the process of cleaning up the prints, which is just going in with sanding sticks and smoothing out parts where the supports were. If there are any supports left, like those little tiny ones, using the tip of a hobby knife to sort of flick those out and clean them up. Here's something I really like about when a STL file is included. That is the full model in its complete form. It makes it really easy to figure out what size base you need for the model if a base wasn't included. So here, I can see this base is too small, and this one looks maybe a little bit too big, but I think that'll be fine because I can make some kind of cool scenic base out of it. So I slice the 130mm base, send it to my ender, and finish cleaning up the parts for Bob. This is printed with a 0.3mm layer height, so it's got pretty visible layers, but it's a base, so it doesn't really matter. So I attempt to super glue the two halves of the body together, but I ran into a little bit of an issue here. Because of the slight warping of the parts, there wasn't really any good contact made along those two edges, so it just wasn't setting. So I had to resort to a different tactic, UV resin, and I should have just done this from the start. This is a much better approach. Oh, can't forget my gloves. So this is just using UV resin, lining the edges with it, sticking them together, and then shining a light on it, and then that'll create a really nice, strong bond. And what's also cool is you can then go in and put in more resin, and then just clean it up a little bit with a paper towel while it's still wet, cure it again, and this is going to effectively be gap filling. A few passes of this, and you've got pretty decently flush surfaces. I do have to do a little bit of extra cleanup work in a second here. I take my hobby knife and sort of like scrape away the high points on these arm joints because I want to get those flush so that the arms sit nicely against those surfaces. A little bit of sanding too, just to get it over the line. So basically here I just went around the whole model, gap filling, sanding, scraping, dusting, just getting it all as clean as I can. Not worrying, I'm not like spending a huge amount of time here. Just a little bit of effort I find goes a long way when it comes to, assembling multi-part resin kits. So there he is, all assembled. It's time to work on that base. This is, oh look, a butter knife. So this is sculptor mold, also known as modeling compound, which is effectively just paper pulp mixed with plaster of Paris in sort of equal volume. You just add a little bit of water to it, mix it up, it makes this like mushy stuff that you can spread around and create like mass with, like landforms. This stuff's great because it dries rock hard, and you can sort of like texture it, and it's really great. So I'm spreading that over this base here, and what I'm trying to create is kind of like a muddy battlefield sort of thing. This particular modeling compound I made really simply just by using a egg carton ground up in a blender, and that's how I got my paper pulp. Cool thing about blending up an egg carton is you don't have to add water because it's dense enough that it will fall into the blades, so you can make up a bag of this stuff very, very quickly. Alright, I then decided to raid the bits box to see what I could find to make this base more interesting. And I had a bunch of these like dead feudal guardsmen from the Maker's Cult, and I thought these would be perfect to scatter around. I also ended up using a couple of resin barrels from TT Combat, I think. They came with some of those MDF terrain kits. So here I am just sort of jamming them down into the modeling compound. You can see it's very malleable at this point, very squishy, very gooey, very easy to work with. It's really easy to make it look like these guys are, part of this ground, that they're sort of sunk into it. So there it is, about an hour later, mostly dry, pretty firm at this point. I didn't get footage of it here, but it actually just popped right off the printed base. That's because while it dries very hard, very firm, very uniform, it doesn't actually adhere to other things very well, so it kind of just falls away from the printed base. But that's fine because it essentially just turns into a big base topper, and all I had to do at that point was just plop down a whole bunch of super glue and just glue it straight back on top. So there we go, that's looking pretty promising. I'm excited to throw some paint on this. I think this is going to turn out really cool. Alright, so I started by base coating everything in black through the airbrush, followed by a light grey zenithal, zenith ool, giving me this kind of effect. Then I took pale flesh mixed with glaze medium, the intent here being to sort of make the pale flesh translucent and allow the shade and highlight of the zenithal underneath to sort of pop through a little bit. Then did the same thing with flat earth and glaze medium and did this all over the base. Alright, now for some base coating. So I go in first on the dead guardsman with some wood grain, which is a transparent brown from Vallejo that's really nice. And I put this over all their bags and pouches. I then go in with a khaki color and do this over all their t-shirts, their cloaks and whatever. And then finally gunmetal over their armor panels and helmets and stuff like that. This is a really, really quick and dirty paint job. I'm not super worried about trying to get these perfect because I'm just gonna grunge the hell out of this later, so it's not really gonna matter. I think it's still gonna look cool. I started applying gunmetal with a brush to the barrels, but then I decided to try sponging it on instead, and I'm glad I did because I think this turned out really cool. This makes an awesome effect. It's not something I've done very often, But after doing it here, I think I'm going to start trying to use it more because, yeah, look at that. It looks awesome. So here I'm doing just a quick dry brush with a slightly off-white, followed by a little bit of stippling here and there with some red-orange on the barrels to create a kind of rust effect. Finally, I go in on this little screen here with a dark green, followed by a lighter green, which it's more of like a pastel. There's a lot of white in it. Moving on to Bob, I put the same gunmetal paint all over his butter knife. I then stick some transparent red all through his gob. Some off-white in his eyeballs. Some bone white on his horns, teeth, and nails. This part of the painting process is always so ugly. Like, it just looks so bad. But it'll come together. It really will. I feel like a dentist here working on his little pearly whites. This is not something I'm well practiced in, and as you can see, my brush tip is awful, but I'm having a go here at painting in some eyes, and I'm really happy with how these turned out at the end. You'll see, they look really cool, I think. I then thin down my transparent red even more with some glaze medium and just go over those luscious lips of Bob's here just to, add a little bit of color. This will get dulled down a bit later. Alright, now for that glorious blue shirt. This is just transparent blue all over with a big brush. I wasn't too worried about brush strokes here, as I figure they'll probably just add texture. And I then went around the edge with a smaller brush and just made sure I got all the trim and whatever. Although I left the trim, I don't know what you would call it, the collar? The part around his neck. I left that white because I thought that would break things up a bit and look a bit better. Or not better, just different. Alrighty, now for the really fun stuff. The dark magic of miniature painting. This is ivory black oil paint with some mineral spirits mixed up to be nice and thin and runny. And this essentially gives you Nuln Oil, but it's way better than Nuln Oil. This is so good, this stuff. So I put this all over his butter knife and just, I'm just absolutely covering it. And now I'm going to add some burnt umber oil paint to that black mix. Stir that in and add a little bit more spirits as well to keep it nice and thin. And now this gives me essentially an epic Agrax Earthshade. This is going to look really dark when it goes on, but in a second what we're going to do is come back in with some little makeup sponges and some spirits and wipe away all the excess, and it's just going to leave all the recesses full of this like really deep, rich wash. It's going to be great. Here I'm using a cobalt blue oil wash mixed with some ivory black to create a very deep blue, and I'm slathering that all over the shirt. And before I forget, the Agrax Earthshade, which was ivory black and burnt umber, I'm just going to slather that all over the base as well. Okay, so here's the magic step. Just taking these little cotton makeup wipes, soaking them in the spirits, and literally just wiping away everywhere all over the model. You can use Q-tips to get into the tighter spots. I'm using this one here just to clean up that collar a little bit. But as you can see, I'm not super concerned about doing a really thorough job here. It's just a fast and loose wipe down, and it leaves a lot of oil behind, and it just looks really cool. And the cool thing about doing this with the really thinned down oil paint is it actually doesn't take that long to dry. It takes, I think, about after an hour I was able to handle this. So I felt like the nails needed a little bit more separation, so I just went in with this wood grain color again, but I thinned it down a bunch and just layered that over the nails. And I then went in with a silver paint and tried doing little scratches on the butter knife. This turned out okay, but if I was going to do this again, I would do it with a new brush that has a nice point on it. Alright, so after gluing Bob down to his base, I then drilled some holes through the bottom up into his heels and stuck some wire up in there to make sure he was, nice and firmly connected to the base. I don't want him falling off. And that pretty much is it. All that leaves to do is just the black rim on the base, and I think we can call Bob done. So, let's take a look. Alrighty, so there you have it. That's Buttermilk Bob from Commissar Gamza's Patreon. This model was really fun to do, and it just makes me smile. It's hilarious. Look at it. Other people I've shown this to, it just instantly makes them laugh. Like, they go, what the hell is that? Like, it's a very cool model. So my final thoughts on Commissar Gamza's Patreon. I think it's good. It's maybe a little too expensive for what you get, and let me tell you why. Where this falls down in terms of value is for two reasons. One small one and one big one. Let's get the big one out of the way first. It's the pre-supported files. As I mentioned earlier, it is in my opinion one of the most important things to get right when you're selling STL files for your customers to print. You want to create that pain-free drag, drop and print experience where at the end of it, the models don't leave anything behind in the printer. They've been pre-supported in such a way that any scarring from the supports that they do have to take happens somewhere not immediately visible on the model, and you don't want to waste more material than you need to. Let's take a quick look at one of the tanks from this month's release, as I found many things here I can shine a light on to help illustrate the point I'm trying to make. Right off the bat, you can see there's a bunch of parts here that are invalidly defined, meaning they have bad geometry somewhere, making them less than perfect for 3D printing. Now, as I've mentioned in another video, the majority of the time these small errors in geo aren't typically going to cause any problems. However, this is a little unfortunate to see when it comes to paid files. I expect paid files to not come with these issues, and frankly we all should expect that when we're handing over our hard-earned cash. Also, I noticed these different weapons options for the sponsons are hard mounted in this sort of 30-degree angle. I haven't seen this before from any other tank kits, and personally this would bug me not being able to make them parallel with the tank chassis. Now, taking a look at the pre-supported files for this tank, we can see again there are parts here that will not fit on a 6-inch printer, that if you just oriented slightly different, they absolutely would fit. This is by far the most common printer size, so you'll always want to support your files with these in mind where you can. There's also parts like this sponson here which have flat planes printing parallel to the build plate. This is not ideal for reasons I won't get into here, but just know that rotating it backwards like so and printing it like this gives a better result. Large parts of the tank like the treads, the chassis and the turret should come hollowed with drain holes preferably, or in both options for those rare few who still want to print these solid. Because as it is, these tanks are going to drink up resin. Also, the way these tracks have been supported here is just straight nightmare fuel for me. Parallels to the bed all the way through, top to bottom. The shear forces, every single layer here, are going to be close to the limits of some printers. And this skirt all the way around the edge and supports are going to be an absolute pain to clean up. I think whoever is supporting these files is prioritizing print time over quality here, as in my opinion the correct orientation to print these treads in would look something close to this. There are also, again, on many of the parts like we saw on the Buttermilk Bob model, just too many unnecessary supports, like on this cannon here, or especially here inside the hole where the turret sits. Not a single one of these is needed. It's wasteful and it creates unnecessary extra cleanup work after printing. So that's the big detractor out of the way, bad supports. And by the way, I hope you can tell I'm not trying to be harsh here. I'm just trying to be critical in the hopes that this information can improve the quality of Gamsa's files and Patreon subscription. Finally, the last issue is presentation and accessibility. This is kind of comprised of a lot of little things, some of which I've already mentioned, like the way the files are distributed could be better, and the inclusion of all versions of the parts. Other than that, I would have really liked to have seen the inclusion of the Chitu box or Lychee files, for those who want to easily edit the pre-supported files. And I'd like to, just see some basic stuff like the inclusion of some renders when you unzip the files. This is always really nice for storage, data hoarding reasons. It makes it a lot quicker when going through your files looking for something to print to just glance at some images rather than open up 3D models. Another small inclusion, more for Gamsa's benefit than anyone else's, would be to include some sort of little document, a text file or a PDF just with a legal disclaimer, don't distribute, don't resell, blah blah blah, that sort of thing. And I really feel strongly that the best way to go about a monthly release like this when it comes to distributing the files is to take advantage of some of the great integrated systems there are out there, like My Mini Factory. This means people don't have to download the files and hope that, you know, they don't suffer a hard drive failure or something like that, because then they're going to lose them. Having them backed up in the cloud to an account that they can connect to at any point in time and download the files as they want is just so convenient. And I'd really love to see that here with Gamsa's Patreon. In conclusion, the models are great. The Buttermilk Bob model I absolutely love. The tanks look really cool. Very cool proxies for some Imperial Guard armor, but I can't say it's worth it for $15 US. Maybe half that in its current form, but not $15. Though one caveat to that, I suppose, is Gamsa is a YouTube content creator, and the Patreon technically serves a dual purpose in that regard, allowing patrons to vote on video topics, etc. So that could be considered additional value, certainly. On that note, actually, I would also really love to see the inclusion of a Commissar Gamza Discord channel. I was disappointed to see there wasn't one. Discord communities surrounding creators are a great way for people to help each other and share in their work and the fun and all that stuff. Other than that, this is fine. This is a great collection of models, and I'm keen to see what he comes out with next. So if you've made it this far, thank you for checking it out. I've got 3D models that you can buy over on Cults 3D if you want to help support the channel and get yourself some cool stuff to print off. So there'll be a link down below, go check that out. I'll also put a link to Gamsa's Patreon as well as his YouTube channel. And I think that's going to wrap this one up. So cheers. Oh yeah, also, thank you to everyone who's been subscribing. It's been really cool seeing the growth of the channel slowly increase. I really appreciate each and every one of you deciding to do that, so thank you very much. Anyway, that's the end of this video. Thanks for watching. I'll have more for you later.